Our next speaker is Nikola Tesla. He is a scientist who worked in the late 19th and 20th century to set the stage for technology breakthroughs that shape our world today. So please welcome Nikola Tesla.
My fellow citizens, I appreciate the opportunity to return and to visit with you. And particularly, I appreciate the opportunity to be here in Colorado because I came here in 1899 and conducted a series of experiments. The gentleman who just spoke, I feel like, was an introduction for me. When I was going to the University of Prague, I explained to the professor there that the rotating magnetic field was very clear to me and that we should be using alternating current. He then spent 2 classes in front of everyone else showing how, in terms of physics, that was totally impossible. I knew it was the only way to go. And it was just part of my lifelong work and teaching and learning and doing research where people objected to what I saw. I was fortunate when I was a child. My father was a Serbian Orthodox priest, and fortunately he had a huge library. And so when I was growing up in the 1850s and 60s, I had the opportunity to read all the time. And for some reason or other, I have a good mind and I don't forget what I read. I hear that I'm called a polymath. I can certainly speak 6 or 7 languages. I have to apologize. I could read Latin and Greek, but I didn't necessarily speak them. My fascination after I had finished my studies in Europe were physics, mathematics, and engineering, and also my fascination with this new electricity that had come into being and our use for it. And I became familiar with what was going on in the United States with Mr. Edison, and I decided to come to this country, which I did in 1884. I met Mr. Edison. He gave me a job, but very early on, we ran into a conflict, and he was totally committed to using direct current. And I knew that economically and in terms of just efficiency, that was not the way to go. He was so opposed to me that he one time wired an elephant and then turned on alternating current, and it killed the elephant. It dropped over. But he had all these press people there with their photographs, showed the photographs, sent them around the country, and told people that if you use alternating current, this is what will happen to you. I knew he was wrong. Fortunately, I met a man named Mr. Westinghouse who understood what I was doing, and he hired me then, and we set up the electricity and the lighting for the Chicago World's Fair in 1893. After that, we got the contract to build the generators and power plants at Niagara Falls that then provided electricity for all of Buffalo. I had met an attorney when I was working there in Niagara Falls who had moved to Colorado Springs, Colorado. And he did it because of his health. He had what we call tuberculosis. And he found that living in a high altitude with clear sunny days was the best for his health. Well, he wrote to me, and he knew the experiments that I was conducting. And he said, come out to Colorado because you want to test out a number of ideas, and you'll be starting at least 6,000 feet. And that made sense to me. So in May of 1899, I took the train, came to Colorado Springs, and I spent the next 7 months testing out my theories and experiments in wireless telegraphy. And I, again, was looked upon as some type of eccentric person. How can you possibly communicate over distance without a wire? If we had the telephone, we had the telegraph, you had to have some instrument you pick up and there's a wire going to a main headquarters, then it's connected to the person you want to talk to. I knew from my own study of physics that I could, with the right technology, send a message from the top of Pikes Peak to Paris. Well, I was looked upon as quite eccentric. But I built a lab on the east side of Colorado Springs near the Colorado School for the Deaf and Blind. And there I conducted a series of experiments by having receivers in places such as Palmer Lake, Fountain, Colorado, areas that were 20 to 25 miles away from my central lab. And basically carried out all the experiments I wanted to. I was also very interested in finding out ways in which we could transfer energy without the use of wires. But I had an enjoyable time here in Colorado, and one problem was that one night I had in my lab, I had my assistant with me, and I had my Tesla coils and things set up, and basically I wanted to create lightning within this lab. I told my assistant at some point that we were ready to do it, and he then threw the switch and lightning exploded in the room, and I was in the room. Within about 2 to 3 seconds, it stopped. And I asked the assistant, "Why did you shut it off?" And he said, "I didn't." What had happened is we'd blown the power plant out in Colorado Springs. And they wanted to be reimbursed for all the damage that I had done. And again, I was seen as some type of eccentric person there. I had given a few talks at the El Paso Club in Colorado Springs. And I said a few things that just seemed outlandish to them. One, in the experiments I had in my lab here in Colorado, I was receiving regular signals from outer space. Someone said, "Well, does that mean that there are human beings out in space?" And I said, "I don't know whether they're human beings, but I think that the possibility of intelligent life in our cosmos is very possible." Well, that was looked upon as eccentric. I said I could also send a signal to Mars, and if it's received, they'll send something back. I also said, but the research I'm doing, that the day is coming when anyone who has a small instrument in their hand can speak to anyone else in the world who has the same instrument. Again, I was a disruptive student within the classroom of humanity at that time. Also, I said that by 1935, that we will be able to stop burning any fossil fuel, coal or oil or wood, because by then we will have solar power to operate all the trains in this country. And I knew from the experiments and work we had done at Niagara Falls that there's enough water power to provide all the energy that's necessary for not only Buffalo, New York, but all of New York. And with water power and with the sun and with the wind, we will stop using all of this. Again, not only was I looked upon as eccentric, but there was a great deal of opposition. If Mr. Rockefeller has become a multimillionaire by digging oil, he's not going to be in favor of this. The same as Mr. Edison was not in favor of alternating current because he was making good money in terms of direct current. But I knew the science and I stuck with it. I'd like to finish my comments and then I welcome your questions. I wanted to read a couple things I had said. In 1935, I wrote an article and I said, long before the next century dawns, the universal utilization of water power and its long-distance transmission will supply every household with cheap power and will dispense with the necessity of burning fuel. I was looked upon as a rather occasionally eccentric person. I never married. I could never understand you women who have long hair. It seems to be just a breeding ground for germs. I guess we all have it, but I still understood that the role of women was improving, and I wrote the following that was published in an interview in Collier's magazine in 1926. And I said, this struggle of the human female toward sex equality will end in a new sex order with the female as superior. The modern woman who anticipates in merely superficial phenomena the advancement of her sex is but a surface symptom of something deeper and more potent fermenting in the bosom of the race. But the female mind has demonstrated a capacity for all the mental acquirements and achievements of men, and as generations ensure, that capacity will be expanded. The average woman will be as well educated as the average man, and then better educated, for the dominant faculties of her brain will be stimulated to an activity that will be all the more intense and powerful because of centuries of repose. Women will ignore precedents and startle civilization with their progress. One last thought I also wrote in that article in 1935. I said, today the most civilized countries in the world spend a maximum of their income on war and a minimum on education. The 21st century will reverse that order. It will be more glorious to fight against ignorance than to die in the field of battle. Thank you, and I welcome your questions.
What do you think is perhaps the most powerful tool we can use in getting big business to see a larger benefit in helpful, cheap technology that will save the planet, which they are a part of, instead of continuing down that freight train to destruction in pursuit of dollars?
What's the best method to get big business to see that possibility? I would say that given the capitalist system we have, to show them that in doing that they can make money. If they can't see, I approached Mr. J.P. Morgan about setting up a laboratory on Long Island, New York, after I left Colorado Springs and went back east, a laboratory where we would be testing solar power. He wanted a clear analysis as to how much money he would make on that. He came to see that he wouldn't make much money, and so he didn't give me the money to do the research. But I was a scientist who was looking for the very best thing to do, and I was not a capitalist who was saying, I have to make money off of this. But I think we have to do that. I would say the second thing that has to be done is education, that the more people who see that the survival of the rest of the planet and the other forms of life are critical to our own survival. And once that happens, then I think that will take place. Let me conclude that many of the other inventions I was responsible for, certainly radio, X-ray, the fluorescent light, the alternating current that you all use. There was certainly a disappointment that I experienced because so often those inventions were being used in World War I and then later on in World War II. And I felt that I had become a pacifist, and I felt that this is no way for the human race to settle its problems. Thank you very much.